And so in that moment, I learned to hold my planning with very, very open hands because I wasn't going to make my child hate learning by forcing them to do something they hated. We were going to sit down and say, okay, what don't you like about it? What do you like? And I put it in that child's hands. I said, okay, now give me a plan for your school year.
Welcome to the Homeschool Perspective, where seasoned homeschooling moms share tips, insights, and resources to empower your homeschool journey.
Hello and welcome back to the Homeschool Perspective. Today we are going to be talking all about planning. This is a time of year when we're all kind of gearing up, getting ready to go, and there are a million different ways to plan and prepare your homeschool year, and we've got a couple of them represented here. So before we dive in talking about how we plan, I think a question that people don't ask directly, but I think is a part of the conversations happening around planning is, do you have to plan? Do you have to have a well thought out, multi-page, that's me, sorry, plan?
Spoiler alert.
I know, right? Plan to be a successful homeschooler. Does that have to happen? What do you guys think? Because I think that having a direction is a good idea. If you're a person who needs a plan to stay consistent, I think you have to have one to be successful. I don't know that everybody does. What are your thoughts?
So we have a daily rhythm. Like we have a rhythm for our day and where school fits into that. But as far as planning out the school year, I used to be the mom that created an IEP for each child that needed one, even though like I'm the school administrator, and wrote down like an entire year's plan for each subject, planning in field trips and art and music and activities and hands-on things and all the blessed things. But what I found was that it created a level of stress, and I took it very personally if it didn't happen. I was like, no, this isn't okay. And so what I switched to instead was buying Plan for Us curriculum that gave us the week by week plan, but I'm not married to the week number. We just do the next day. So, say something's like week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, but we take week 3 off. We just jump back into week 3 in our 4th week of school because we decided to like rabbit trail and kind of pretend we were unschoolers for a week or something. So I don't plan, but I purchase things that give me a structure.
Oh, that's interesting.
I know, outsourcing it. Wait, we have to go back though. You said that you started out doing a full IEP for your own children. Can we talk about that for a second? Because I think where did that come from for you? Like what? Because that's a lot. Anybody who's ever been in an IEP meeting or if there's any teachers listening who've been a part, they're horrific. They're so lengthy. So where did it come from for you that you wanted to do that?
Yeah. I didn't want to, but I was afraid not to. When you're a new homeschooling parent, the system can feel really scary.
Yeah.
And if you deal with the wrong people without the confidence and the knowledge of what you're doing, it can feel threatening. At least it did to me. I'm not saying that it is. I'm saying it can feel that way, right? If you're not equipped to handle it. And so when we adopted 2 children with special needs and we came back to the States, the state wanted to help provide services for one of our adopted children who needed a lot more than we could provide for him at that time while we were trying to get things rolling. And the only way they would provide it was if we enrolled him in the local school district. And so hence began my season, thank God it was a short one, of being a public school mom. I just wasn't cut out for that. It was horrible for our family and as a whole, but it was also really detrimental to our son. He actually went backwards. It was really, really awful. So what we did instead was we worked with his providers, with our insurance company and everything else to prove that we could get him all of those services and do it well while he was homeschooled. And so part of that proof was me coming in with a stack of documentation, including a fully functioning IEP. Now, we also had a daughter with special needs, and no one required anything for her. Everybody's totally happy to let us homeschool her. But to be better safe than sorry, because they kept saying things like, well, how do we know that they're getting an adequate education? How do we know that you're providing what they need? This was my guarantee to the powers that be that were watching over our shoulders at the time that they were getting it. And then it became habit because they're obviously not at our son who's adopted, his IQ is a 28. You know, he at the time he took the IQ test and tested for his IEP, he couldn't clap. And yet they're like, well, what are his math goals? And I'm looking at them going, like, right now we're trying to potty train him. He's a teenager and we're trying to potty train him.
Right.
And his pediatrician is telling us this isn't possible. What do you mean? What are his math goals?
Yeah.
And so we felt as though it behooved us to be very realistic. Doctors' notes from his pediatrician, notes from his physical therapist, his speech therapist, and so on, to set actual accurate goals for him. And so his math goal became spatial awareness, and it was picking up the ball and putting it in the hole. And that kind of a thing. So we were able to break down his goals by subject and present them. And what we found was that actually opened doors for him to have access to services without the public school system being involved. So IEPs became a part of our lives for that reason.
But you said it carried over to all of your kids. So like at the time, did you do that just because
anybody that was not in a typical educational path had documents to support it? Because when people are looking over your shoulder at one of your children rather, and especially when you have a large family like ours, they ask questions about all of the children. And again, I didn't know I could say none of your business. Like I had no clue at that point in time that was an appropriate answer.
Right.
You know,
but that is scary. I mean,
so
like,
I did it.
Yeah, I probably would have done the same thing in your shoes, honestly. Like I would have had ample documentation and proof. And
now it's just habit. So that son will graduate this next year, but he'll have documentation for his progress. And I actually am kind of thankful that we did it because it made me really aware of what he was doing and the progress he's making. Because when you're living in it day by day and progress is slow with special needs, sometimes you're like, are we getting anywhere? But then I can look at those IEPs and go, oh yeah, we've come a long way. And we get to celebrate that.
Okay, so this brings me to another question. This feels like almost two different things that we often put together, but documentation and planning. Like there is, I love that. I'm so glad you shared that story because I think some people do it out of complete anxiety and fear. I'm going to just do everything.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure I have everything. And it's coming from a fearful place. Yours was in a moment where there was a clear intention and there was a plan. And this was, there was a clear start, like cause and effect for why you were doing it. But I wonder, do you guys include documenting? Do you do documentation for your homeschool? Do we want to say that on the podcast? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we do. Right? I mean, I think
do you include it in your planning? Or is it like separate in your mind?
So the way that I do the planning is I started out doing way more, like way overboard. I had a long range plan that was broken down by subjects and it was broken down by kid. And it was the teacher in me. I love creating a long range plan. And that's something I still do. I love that, seeing the overall, but the day to day and the details, that's when it gets lost for me. So as far as planning goes, but the documentation I can do. So if I can take my year goal and my long range plans, and I can break those down further, just until it feels good for me. So I still feel that wiggle room. I still feel like we can, take a day off or on a random Tuesday. We can just do what we want. I am not married to my plan. Then, from there I can document and know that we are working towards that long range goal, that I have the plan that I have in place without it being restrictive to us. So the documentation is like that further instead, in lieu of the further planning. You know what I mean? Like instead of breaking down day to day, I just document day to day.
And I use the plans as the documentation now. So we moved from a low regulation state to a no regulation state. And that was, I was like, okay, I'm not okay with this. Like, I like having the documentation for my kids. They decided to pursue secondary education or anything. I don't want to be grabbing things at the last minute for them. But I'm also very thankful for the freedom to document it gently. So we track school days. We do 180 days a year.
Yeah.
And then my documentation is literally, hey, here are the books we used. And each of them comes with a plan. And then if we do field trips, Spark Schooling, like I'll include our art and music that we use from Rachel's program. And I will document that on their mid-year and end of year report cards. And then also my kids are big into volunteering and things in the community, and we'll document any awards that they get there, any huge accomplishments, any big impact that they make, and where they spend their time. And so it's very simple documentation, but it's very clear. And because I have our textbooks, their publishers, and we use those lesson plans that come with them, then I can just say, hey, we used this curriculum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys keep samples of your kids' work?
We have to.
Yeah.
So it's not very well organized, and I probably should go and organize it. It's just, I just throw it in a tub. I'm like, samples.
I do too. Or I take pictures. When I'm on top of it, I take a picture and then I have a Google Drive file for each kid, but I'm not always on top of it. So and then at the end of the year, I'll be like, ooh, I probably should have grabbed something out of these books. So there is 2 tubs in the garage that are like overflowing with stuff. But I try to take a picture and put it into the drive.
That's actually one of my summer goals. My summer goals are to organize all of my documentation and my all of the the 90-day reports and all of that, like get it all organized in one place with the by grade level with which kid. I mean, it's kind of a mess right now, but I could find anything in it, but it's not organized. So that's a goal.
I love that. I love that you can find anything in it. Isn't that amazing? People can look, if it's your stack, you can find it. Yeah.
Of the 3 of us, Rachel's probably the most documented, I think, in the sense because her state what it requires, right?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because I do it by choice now.
Yeah.
She does it by rote. I'm curious because our personalities are coming into play too. Like you're clearly seeing our personality types come out. Where does that fit with you? Because you're super organized, Allie. I hear you like Google Drive and everything else. I'm like, man, I need you to teach me. Come set me up with a system like that. Did you always do that naturally?
No, I think so. Invention. What is it? Necessity is the mother of invention, right? There's a couple of reasons that our homeschooling and my planning process with our homeschooling has shifted. And part of it is the last couple of years, I've been working a lot, which means I was sharing homeschooling where my husband works a 410 and he steps in and homeschools one morning. But we're not together all the time. We're together all the time, but he's at work. He's not seeing our homeschool all the time. My mom will sometimes come and help with homeschooling if I have meetings and things. And we are shifting that now, which I'm excited about. But during that time, when I had people who could come and step in, I realized really quickly that I had to get much more specific about what and how things needed to be done. And I have kiddos who, learn very differently. And so if I would be if I said to them, just do the next math page, that wasn't necessarily enough to make sure that my kiddo was getting things the way they needed. And so I've always done my teacher background, I call it a scope and sequence. I think you called it a year review but I've always done a general plan that has, the months and the subjects and what I'm trying to accomplish that year, major books we want to read, fun things we want to do, things like that for holidays, something pretty broad. But then the other thing I do is I create this, and I know this sounds so type A, but it became a necessity. I have SOPs for every subject. So an SOP is a standard operating procedure. So I literally have in our book, we have the big year-long overview, and then each subject has basically a checklist of how it works. So what materials need to come out for it. So I have a kiddo who's using a math program that the math cubes that we have are crucial to their success in completing that. And so, especially at the beginning of the year, before my kids are in the rhythm of knowing what to go grab, and when they were younger too, having that person know, hey, they need to grab these cubes or that kind of thing. was really helpful. Or, we're going to discuss this part, because that's the other thing too. And Rachel, I know you do this too. I don't necessarily use the curriculum the way it's written.
Oh,
I don't necessarily follow the rules. And so my kids would be like, right? My kids would be sitting down to do spelling or, something with dad. And he's like, well, wait, it says to, and they're like, that's not how mom does it. So it's like, it's not really fair to ask dad to come in and help, or grandma to come in and help, give them the book, and then have it be completely different than what they're used to. So I have those standard operating procedures. And then when I do my quarterly planning for my business and for other things, I sit down and do a quarterly reset of where we're headed, what goals, what's working. Because the plan I start with in August is never, that year-long plan is never what actually happens.
Right.
But it offloads things out of my brain, so I'm not constantly thinking about it. Because otherwise for me, it's like pressure if it's not somewhere I know it's like pinned and taken care of. So I always shift it as my kids' needs and interests change, but it gives me a direction. It gives me like a compass to go into. And then I have set times where I go and look at it, reevaluate, and adjust as we go. So I don't necessarily have like a daily plan. We have our daily rhythm, and then I have the SOPs. And yeah, that's how I plan. With the documentation, I try to get at least 2 pictures a week, or if I miss it, then it goes in the big dump box of their work. Because again, I think I've worked with homeschooling families across the world for so long, and there's been so many situations where something will come up and there's a benefit to having all of that documentation. And if they don't have it, then like you said, Lisa, like parents are scrambling to try to create it after the fact. And I don't want to scramble.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I used to do way more in the documentation and I also had fewer kids that I was homeschooling at the time. Like if we went on a field trip, like I did a whole write up, and it was like this beautiful, like all the things that they learned. And it was great. And it was way
Now I stick with photos. I'm like,
Yep.
look through the photos and remember.
Yeah, exactly. And so having the long range plan, or the scope and sequence that you were talking about, is like, I feel like that is at least crucial, because we all do it in our own way. Like Lisa has it outsourced, like send me the long range plan, like, you choose what you want to include, you have that, and then they send you the plan. And there's so many different ways of doing it and accomplishing that. And then you said you break it down quarterly and revisit it and make sure you're on track. And I do that every 6 weeks. And I think, Lisa, you do it every 6 weeks as well. So it's just like everyone kind of falls into something that ends up working for them, because we all kind of not scramble mode, but like over the top, like I know I did, like over the top planning, all the documentation, all the things, got to have it all organized and in order. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to settle into this nook and I'm going to follow. It's like Plinko. I'll follow in.
But, there are unschoolers out there who don't plan this way, and it still works for them.
Right.
I mean, we just happen to be 3 people who, plan more. And I think the families that have inspired me the most are so different in their approaches to this. And that's why I'm laughing, because I don't have an educational background like y'all do at all. And I never trained to be in a classroom. So I have an educational background in the sense that I've always taught children.
Yeah.
And I've got training, but not classroom training. So I've never been taught to plan. But I was a mother's helper for a family in New York, and New York has a lot of homeschooling regulations. And I remember sitting there and helping her prepare for the meetings with the school district and getting things out. So I think that was my first introduction to homeschooling. So that definitely influenced like my flavor, if you will, of planning. But I was also heavily influenced by a family that completely unschools, like totally unschools, to the point where I'm like, how do you know your kids like learn anything, right? But they actually have amazing documentation. They've learned how to provide it, and they've learned how to see. And so I think for me, the benefit of planning, and the reason I like planning the way that I do, where planning is also my documentation, is it lets me see my kids' progress. And there was one year where one of my kids fought me tooth and nail over a specific subject. And I'm like, okay, but like we picked this subject out together and we have the plan and here's the curriculum that the that came with the subject and this was what we agreed to. And they're like, yeah, but I hate it. Mm-hmm. And so in that moment, I learned to hold my planning with very, very open hands because I wasn't going to make my child hate learning by forcing them to do something they hated. We were going to sit down and say, okay, what don't you like about it? What do you like? And I put it in that child's hands. I said, okay, now give me a plan for your school year. Here's everything you need to learn this year in this subject to graduate this grade. How do you want to make that happen? And they did. And that was a turning point for me where curriculum and plans became tools, not bosses.
Yeah.
And that was like so good.
I love that. That's what I always say. And I'm always like, yeah. I love it when that happens.
Yep. Yeah. I hope that everybody listening is finding a spot where your where your plan is not the boss. Cause that's ultimately, I think, I've worked with unschoolers and I have friends who are unschoolers and I love their planning seems to be more in a conversational process that's happening all the time, right? They're talking to their kids. But we've talked about this before, but it's there. It's still happening. They're still planning. They're still documenting. But it has a completely different look. And it's really about figuring out how you work best and then making that function. I think a lot of the doing too much in the beginning thing comes from people trying to plug themselves into someone else's system. And that's where it always goes wrong. You're never going to be successful in a system that you're not going to use. So I think that's the bigger idea though, right? Is that you have to figure out what serves you and how your brain works, what your personality is, and then do that kind of planning. But there's definitely planning in unschooling.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I've talked to more and more families, and I think that I would, say that we're this way, that are really, they'll say things like, we unschool some of the time, or we unschool, some people say they unschool everything but math, which I totally get that. And I know hardcore, like diehard unschoolers, like the purists, would take some issue with some of these things. But I think what those people are describing, and this is how I would see our homeschool, is it's very interest led and child led, and so when you're homeschooling, you have so much time for individual interests, and you have to explore those things and to really dive deep on those things that your kids want to explore, that you can literally do a full curriculum that's structured. And I mean, it can be a loose structure too, like not rigid. I'm not saying that, but you can have your curriculum for all your subjects and allow your children to explore and to have a completely separate child-led like education. They could do that both. And I think that that's what we do. I have a lot of, like, I want to guide my kids. I look at myself as a guide and I say, we're going to study earth science this year. And so that's everything earth and space and geology and, all those things. Like that's what actually we're planning for this coming year. But like, if they're wanting to learn about, the ancient Egypt and the pyramids and the science and like the building and like, like all of that kind of stuff that like goes into, that's what they're going to do, Right. And like, actually this year, for an opposite example, this year, we were supposed to be learning about life sciences, and my one kid is like off learning about space. So it's like, yeah, you learn, you go do your interests, and it makes the learning that's like in the more formal time more meaningful when you get to those things that they've already explored in an interest, or after they've explored it, the formal, then they can go off and do more. So I get both. Like I think that for me and the way that I do the planning, and I, with my education background, maybe I couldn't only have the interest based. I could not go full unschooler. That would bother me. And I think that it would bother my kids. I think that my kids need a little bit of that guidance and structure to pave the way so that they can go and explore and have that more creative learning that they take after that. And so I plan to I plan a more structured year in order for them to become creative, independent, child-led learners. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Mhm.
I mean, that's a
I think
lot.
so. No, well, no, but like
It makes
I mean,
sense.
tell me if I'm wrong here, but to crystallize your point, like like our children are all different too. So, I was talking about like our personalities, but our kids are different too, and giving them space and room to follow their passions and interests and to know that like you can look at unschooling, admire, appreciate, love it, and have kids that it won't serve and that you can choose, you can create something that is specific to them and that serves your kids and you. I love it.
So I was having
What
a
about, oh, go ahead.
sorry. I was having a
No, you're
conversation
good.
with someone last night who asked me about homeschooling. They're not currently homeschooling, but they're interested in it. And two of my homeschool graduates were in the room. And it was so funny because I was saying, well, this child was, really great. They finished all of their core subjects. I plan history, science, English language arts, and math for the year. Like those are the core things that I am determined that we'll do. But everything else, the kids really help direct. And I had said, this child was always done with school by 11 o'clock in the morning. They would get up early because if they had to school after 11, they were like, oh, it's taking forever. And they hated it. And they were so proud because then they were done with school for the day. But what they didn't realize was their school day was probably another 3 or 4 hours by choice because they were studying things that they were interested in. And I was still counting that as elective. So I was sharing with this parent how this child did an entire college level course in in one subject, and in another subject they did an internship and a skills, I guess you'd call it, like in plumbing and electrical work. And the kid looked at me, no, I didn't do that in school, I just learned it. I'm like, okay, but because you were school aged, this was an elective for you.
We can't.
I literally journaled the hours that they took because our state had requirements for the number of study hours, and when they hit them, there was their elective credit for that subject. And it was so funny that they're graduates and they're like, oh my gosh, you tricked me into taking extra classes. You guys,
Well,
like,
there's
but you just
like,
did it.
just documented what you
They
chose.
right.
That's all.
Yeah.
And my youngest was like, well, I want to study art this year. Because I always ask them, what elective do you want? And what do you learn how to do? She goes, well, I'm going to be an artist. And I said, okay, well, I don't know anything about art. So let's learn this together. What do you want to do? And she goes, well, what do you think makes a good artist? And I said, well, what kind of art do you like? She goes, all of it. And I said, what kind of art do you think is good? She looked at me and she goes, how dare you say that somebody's art isn't good? And I said, excuse me? She goes, it's their art. It's from in here. It's always good. And I'm like, yes, ma'am. Like, okay. I'm like, you win. You're right. And I said, well, I think that you should look at different types of art and different artists and learn about them and how they learned. And then we can pick how they learned and you can choose to learn that way. And she goes, yeah, that could work. Let's do that this year. So I ordered this huge book of all of Vincent van Gogh's paintings, like the whole book. And she's learning how to read, right? And she is sitting there sounding it out, and she's like almost halfway through the book.
Wow.
And I put out their astronomy stuff and their geology stuff because two different things. I started to say astrology, not the same. Astronomy and geology books for the two different kids and their sciences. And they're already halfway done with their science for the year. Oh, wow. We haven't even started the next school year yet because they're like, this is so fascinating. And they're both like, well, maybe we can just do them together and do both this year. And I was like, okay, cool. But they're not doing school yet. So it's so much fun for them. And that's why I think we have to hold planning with open hands because our kids sometimes run way faster than we're ready to. And other times they're like, no, we got to slow down.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So my plan is like a gist, like you said, the scope and sequence.
Yeah.
But we pick it up at their rhythm and we let them because we're partners with them in their education.
Yep.
And they have more of a partnership share as they get older. But we're always partners from the first day.
So I love that. When I'm doing my year-long scope and sequence, when we're choosing our curriculum, when I do the quarterly things, I do it with each of my kids. So they're actively choosing, like when we're choosing math curriculum, they watch the YouTube videos with me. They look through once I've narrowed it down, right? Because it's overwhelming, but I'll narrow it down. And then once I've got it narrowed down to a couple, they look over it with me. And if they don't like any of them, we go back, we try again. But My kids are actively a part of every stage of that planning. And whenever we have a weekly family meeting, and there have been times where kids come and said, hey, I really want to do this. My oldest came and he's like, I've decided I want to write a book. So can we switch my writing so I can start writing? Like, can I do that instead? No problem. Like, absolutely. And I think it's that, like, those conversations, hearing our kids and them get excited about things and making room for it is so, it just makes homeschooling so much more joyful.
So do you
Because
guys
they get to be a
change?
partner.
Like, do you change curriculum, like math, like year to year?
Yeah. Not necessarily. When they find something that works for them, we stick with it. But we have changed math. We've changed lots of different things based on how that kiddo learns. The thing is, it's not just on a whim. Like if they come and they're like, I hate math, I don't like this. We have to have a conversation. What is it that we don't like? Why don't we like it? Do we need to make an adjustment? Is it a mindset issue? Because there are things that, sometimes it's just a mindset issue. Like you were saying, it's not school, so they're having fun. Like sometimes it's just a mindset. We have to work through the mindset. But if they can articulate a specific reason why something's not working for them, and we can proactively as a team find something else, we absolutely make a change.
Yep.
So, and we've even been known to do that mid-year. We've stopped reading books sometimes because there was a read aloud a couple of years ago that everybody was like, every homeschooler was talking about. They're like, this is the best book ever. Everyone's got to read it. And we're like 3 chapters in and all of us are like, we hated it. We hated it. And so we finally were like, we're giving ourselves permission to set this aside. This was not our jam.
That was probably one of the hardest things for me to learn. Like for real, like once we started something, I'm like, if I stop reading it, like, am I modeling something bad for my kids? Am I teaching them it's okay to quit? But man, there were some times where we just had to pivot because we were like, it was like, man, if I push us through this, like, yes, I'm modeling stick-to-itiveness, but I'm also modeling that learning is boring and it sucks and it's painful. And in the early years, we don't want to teach our kids that. We want them to enjoy the dopamine hits, if you will, that come with amazing learning so that they want to keep learning and curiosity, right? We want to keep the wonder alive, not snuff it out early.
Something that helped me with that. Oh, sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
No, I was going to just add on to that because when you are holding fast to your curriculum and the way it's presented, you might be afraid to do that.
Yeah.
And like but if you look at it from the perspective of like, what would the curriculum writer want you to do right now? They would want you to just, okay, so maybe, the chapter is on, I don't even know. Give me a subject. I don't know. Whatever it is, like you close the book and go do something that excites them, that is curiosity led, that they can use their creative minds to really infuse it into it. Like think outside the box when it comes to curriculum, because if it starts to get boring, like I have done that with lots of curriculum that has stopped working mid-year. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to take it. It was supposed to be scripted. It was supposed to be like the scripted curriculum. You're supposed to read every word. I'm going to change it. And now it's no longer a scripted curriculum. Now I'm using it as a spine. I'm using it as a guide. So now I have a list of things that I need to get through, and you can even do this if it was a like totally done for you, open and go curriculum too. Like, okay, now it's just a spine. All right, now I know I need to hit this and then I need to hit this, and you can still keep the pacing the same, but you're just hitting those points. Like you're just going to learn about, let's say it was science and you're just hitting all the different families of animals, and you're going to learn about, okay, so now we're learning about mammals. Like, I don't care what the book says, but we're going to do it. We're going to go explore everything we can about mammals. We're going to go to the zoo, like whatever, and do all of those things that were in the book, that were in order. They were all there, but just and that's what it is, using curriculum as a tool. But it's just changing the way that you're using it that fits the interests, the current interests of your kids. And if you're excited about it, because you're getting behind it and you're helping with the planning and you're going side by side with your kids and saying like, how could we learn about, the families, like the animal families? What would be the best way to do this? And they're like, oh, well, I want a book on lions. And I'm like, okay, well, let's get a book on lions, or I want to watch this show. Like one year we did that and we took, we watched Wildcrats. I mean, we were like, That's what we did. And it was a great show. And my kids learned so much. And we did that with books, with, this specific example that I'm talking about. So there's ways to take that curriculum and modify it. And if you're excited about it and you're modeling that for your kids, that learning is fun, and that taking, that curiosity and going a different direction with it is something to be celebrated. That is real learning. Sticking to the textbook when it's boring and we're just reading a textbook, or reading even using an open and go curriculum that comes with crafts. It comes with crafts because they wanted it to be open and go. And so they're like, here, do these crafts and call it a day. Your kids don't like crafts. Well, you don't have to do it. You don't have to, just because it's in the curriculum. That's not modeling what learning really is for your kids. If they see you excited, they see you curious, and they see you like diving into that with them, alongside them, they're gonna love it. And that's a valuable lesson that they're gonna take with them, forever.
Absolutely. And something that helped me kind of distinguish in these scenarios of, am I letting them down? Are they going to be people who quit everything? We've kind of shifted our mindset to say that if they make a commitment to a person, or we make a commitment to a team or a group, that is the commitment we always follow through with. If we've said, we've made we have staked our word on what we're doing, we've said we're going to do something, then, or people are relying on us, that's something that we commit to, we finish, as long as it's healthy, safe, all of those things. But when it comes to curriculum, it's always a tool. And I think that's kind of been reiterated here. It's a tool. So we do not need to hold ourselves accountable to a tool. It's a tool. It's a thing. We don't have to be accountable to that thing. We're accountable to our family, to our kids, to their learning process. This has been such an awesome episode. Is there anything else you guys want to make sure they hear about planning? Any takeaways? Anything that surprised you? Huh?
So I think we covered it. It really is that the plans, the guides, they serve you. They don't boss you around. They're just meant to be tools.
Yeah. So try different tools, find the one that you use, that you enjoy, that brings life to your family, and you'll find that cozy nook, like Rachel was saying, where you'll be able to enjoy your homeschool life. We'll see you here next time.